Lee Steinberg is one of the most influential sports agents in history and founder of Steinberg Sports and Entertainment. A Los Angeles native, he earned both his undergrad and law degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, where he served as student body president as both an undergrad and a law student. Committed double bear. Over his career, Mr. Steinberg has represented more than 300 professional athletes across football, basketball, boxing, golf, and more. His clients have included numerous Hall of Famers and elite competitors such as Oscar de la Hoya and Lennox Lewis. He's negotiated contracts totaling over $4 billion and has represented the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft an unprecedented 8 times, alongside 64 first-round picks. Mr. Steinberg is also widely recognized as a real-life inspiration for the Oscar-winning film Jerry Maguire. Beyond sports representation, Mr. Steinberg has directed more than $1 billion to charitable causes worldwide, reflecting his long-standing commitment to athlete advocacy, philanthropy, and leadership within the sports industry. His newest book, The Comeback, a playbook for turning life setbacks into victories, will be released March 24th and is currently available for pre-order. I placed a couple of the placards for your viewing on the table. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Lee Steinberg to the podium.
It's hard to compete with lunch, right? It's a fundamental need. I want to start by thanking the people who put this conference together, some really inspired law students. And let's have a big round of applause for the people and staff who put this together, because it's quite a gargantuan. Okay, so here comes the commercial. I wrote this book, The Comeback, which is available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon for, and then the 24th it comes out officially. And it's about resilience. It's about how to deal with life setbacks. And life inevitably will come along, and it can be health issues, it can be marital or relationship issues, it can be financial issues, it can be addiction. And so it talks about my crash from alcohol 20 years ago and recovery, and then tells the story of athletes and different adversity they faced and how they came back from it. So if it interests you, give it a read. And this is the 11th conference on sports and entertainment done by, we used to call it by a different name, but I guess it's Berkeley Law. And I'm really proud of the students who put this together. I was thinking, listening to the panels, which really covered every single aspect of NIL, so I'm left with very little to add to it, about what Rip Van Winkle would have done if he fell asleep back when I started in 1975, and he awoke today with this new world of the way information travels and the various devices and proliferation of TV and the rest. And he'd be in culture shock. He would be absolutely in some insane asylum somewhere trying to reconcile how quickly this growth has happened, right? So there was an ongoing problem for years in that athletes sitting in collegiate programs used to go to and watch the television package and television revenue and watch the packed stadium and think, I'm struggling on scholarship. And as a matter of fact, the scholarship, especially in urban areas, wasn't really enough for an athlete from a financially challenged situation to be able to live at the same standard of living as his non-athletic peers. He was stopped from working to supplement his income the way other students can. And the rigors of practice and play took up a great deal of time and energy, hard enough to be a student athlete. So the athletes were resentful. So along comes the House versus the NCAA, and it challenges the fact that these athletes were not being paid or compensated for a fair share, even though the name and likeness was being used. So it would have taken very little to solve this problem. It would have been spotting athletes on campus who were having problems with enough money for an apartment or a trip home at Thanksgiving and the rest of it. They could have given $5,000 to those athletes who showed economic need, and they would have been extremely happy. Instead, the NCAA wouldn't move, held on to the concept of amateurism. And eventually, Nancy Skinner, state senator here in California, proposed SB 206. And that was done in 2020. Just imagine how fast this has all happened. And SB 206 said that an athlete on a college campus could hire a marketing director to give them deals in name, image, and likeness. When California passed that law, the rest of the states went into a panic. And I remember watching Nick Saban, who always was cautious talking about long-term players, talking about the fact that Bryce Young had gotten $1 million. It's like Dr. Evil, $1 million in endorsements. Oh my God, this is Nick Saban, who kept the expectation level as low as possible for young developing players. And he's bragging about the amount of money. What was he doing? He was advertising. Come to Alabama and you can get large dollars also. So the rest of the states freaked out because California was now going to have the ability to sign all the best athletes because it could offer them NILs. And quickly they rebelled. Finally, the pressure became enough for the NCAA to write a new rule that said athletes could have marketing directors. But this is the law of unintended consequences. It reminds me of 3 strikes, right? They pass a bill to stop violent crime. And so you're going to put people with 3 strikes, 3 charges, 3 verdicts into, you're going to put them into prison for the rest of their life. Well, what happened was there wasn't enough space in the prison system. So they were mandated to keep these guys who were in their 50s and 60s and 70s and were not going to commit crime and let out, because of lack of space, violent young criminals who were very likely to commit more crimes. Unintended consequences. So to solve this problem, they unleashed the Wild Wild West, the Oklahoma land rush. And let's start with the concept of who is doing NIL deals. Well, the universities have some role in it, but it's being controlled by marketing directors. And who's a marketing director? What are their qualifications? Not necessarily anything. To represent an NFL athlete, you need to be certified by the Players Association. And that certification is a rigorous background screen of any fraud problems, criminal problems, and all the rest of it. It also entails taking a test on the collective bargaining agreement that 50% of the people fail. It's a rigorous test. And it also puts people under the administration of a players union that has rigorous standards for what you can and cannot do. Oh, little things like being able to explain a contract to someone who's 17. So what's happened is there are now thousands of people who are marketing directors, and they're out there representing athletes. How early does this start? I've had calls from 15-year-olds or the parents of 15-year-olds asking for advice and asking me if I'd be the marketing director. Now, we've had a firm over time which has emphasized the concept of athletes as role models, right? And arguably, sports representation started here at Berkeley when I lived in Norton Hall. And they moved the freshman football team into the dorm, and one of the students was the quarterback, Steve Bartkowski. And in 1975, he became the very first pick in the first round of the NFL draft. And I was out of law school year, and he asked me to represent him. But there was no field. Teams could just hang up the phone and say, we don't deal with agents. So it took a while to get protections and eventually unionization and all the rest of it. So the first problem you have is that many of the people doing this, there are firms that have 1,200 clients. A typical football representation firm may have 200 to 300 clients. And if they're not certified, what kind of representation are those young people getting? The reason I don't want to do it is if I'm asking athletes to be role models and retrace their roots to the high school, collegiate, and professional community, that doesn't resonate so well with a 15-year-old. If you're talking about long-term health, if you're talking about second career, that's not apt to be someone that's that forward-looking at that younger age. So here's what we've devolved to. High school to college recruiting is now just like NFL free agency. And I think in the future it will lead to the development of two tiers. I do believe that there will be 4 or 5 conferences that will split away from the NCAA because they can negotiate their own television contracts. They don't need the NCAA to provide rules. They can do it themselves. And what's happened now is that those major conferences sign all the 5-star recruits and 4-star recruits. 2 years ago, the leading payor for NILs was Ohio State. Well, coincidentally, they won the national championship in football. Alums at Texas Tech this year decided they were losing out on the action. So they raised $70 million and all of a sudden had a top 10 rated team. These schools are played off against themselves in the process. And so it becomes a bidding war. The best quarterback in the 25 class was a young man named Underwood. And he committed to LSU. And they gave him an offer, a package of $4 million in NIL. But that wasn't the end of the story, because Michigan came along with a big alum who offered him $14 million. And before he ever played a down for LSU, he transferred to Michigan. If you can call it a transfer, since he hadn't really done anything at LSU. $14 million up front, actually spread over 3 or 4 years. So the dollars have become astronomical. So if we have the Wild West with no regulations, the second bite at the apple is the transfer portal. And so what's the effect of this? It makes older players on the roster free agents, and they get to bid off against each other. What gets lost in the process? The concept of an athlete spending multiple years at the same institution. The first pick in last year's draft attended 3 different colleges and went from Washington State to Miami and the rest of it. So it undercuts the concept that, at least in a sport like football, you could grow up watching this player, you could watch his development, you could become attached to him. That's all gone. The whole concept of waiting in line to be a starter, which SC used to sign 10 running backs, and they just waited. Marcus Allen played 1 year, but he was a first-round draft pick and a Heisman Trophy winner. So that's gone. And remember, when we go back to agents, who's assisting the athletes in making these decisions? A marketing agent, okay, who has no particular relationship or loyalty to anyone. So we now have this 2-tiered system. Unintended consequences. Who loses from this? Well, women's sports. Let's talk about that for a second. If the reason we have college athletic programs is because they're supposed to provide a learning and educational experience for the athletes competing, then the charge of a university should be to have the most athletes possible learning about discipline and teamwork and processing bodies of complex information in real time and learning courage under pressure and the ability to produce in adversity. If those are all good values, then how do we have a system that basically just ignored Title IX? And when they did the first settlement of House versus the NCAA, the money, the billions of dollars, was allocated on a formula that gave 75% to college football. It gave 15% to college basketball. It gave 5% of that big payment to women's basketball, and 5% for all the rest of the sports. So how do we ever protect under this system the non-revenue producing sports? How do we sustain that large opportunity to learn these skills? Difficult. And they just ignored it. So what has the NCAA done to clarify all of this? Nothing, really, nothing. And it's all in the hands of collectives. So those universities that have the most alums, that are the most rabid about the program, those are the universities that will be big winners here. So that House settlement went on to say that a conference could take 20% basically of the average athletic revenue for its conference and pay athletes with it. And how's that money broken up, and how is that money allocated? So you've got these two disparate competing interests. Our charge as the universities to offer educational opportunities to the largest amount of people. But football and basketball are the big revenue sports. This country's gone gaga over football. Okay, 130 million people watch the Super Bowl. It's not only NFL football, it's not only the most popular sport, it's the most popular form of televised entertainment because 48 of the top 60 Nielsen-rated shows were NFL football. When some of us were growing up, it was baseball. But that's sports dominant. And in viewer polls, right behind NFL football, is college football. And then you've got the rest of it. And there have been three fundamental changes that threaten college sports and what we've ever thought about sport. The first is NIL. Now, how uncomfortable is it for me to point out the hypocrisy of NIL when my whole life has been spent getting players more compensation? So do I believe that athletes should have a bigger chunk of the money that they generate? Absolutely. But it brings up these different problems. The second thing just to think about is gambling. When professional sports and different entities okayed gambling, they didn't think about the fact that what keeps these massive TV contracts going and what keeps the massive merchandising and what keeps gate and what keeps naming rights and every other ancillary revenue source is people's belief that the games are played on an even playing field. Both sides are trying as hard as they can. Everyone's motivated to win. The refereeing is done in an impartial way. And the minute that you have a college or pro athlete in economic problems, shaving points, shaving performance, or giving inside information to a gambler who wants to focus on a prop bet, right? The player will play X percentage in this quarter, he'll score X amount of points. But that athlete who tells, and we've had these cases in basketball and baseball, and we have players who are in trouble for football, then it reduces sports to wrestling. It's an exhibition. It's not a real sport. So that's a problem. And the third is conference realignment. Now, look, you can walk out there next to the Camp of Neely, and what do you look at? The Pacific Ocean. So what conference is Cal in now? A conference that looks out over the Atlantic Ocean, okay? And I know that they like some of the advantages and all the rest of it, but from my standpoint, I want to see Cal play USC. I want to see Cal play Stanford. You know, I want regional rivalries and to be able to work up a ferocious amount of hate for your for your rival. And so that's a problem too. So these changes have all occurred with such extreme speed, and the gambling stats are scary. The amount of young men who gamble on collegiate and professional sports is astounding. There is new research showing that, I mean, Richard earlier talked about the fact that as a kid sitting at an athletic contest, the outcome is immaterial as long as his player scores X points. And he's anxiously awaiting that. So how does that undercut our basic feeling about team loyalty and real concern and the rest of it? I mean, these are fundamental questions. So what did anybody do to try to put some framework to this? Well, there's one bill called SCORE that one bill is backed by Democrats, one bill is backed by Republicans, because even on this ecumenical issue, there's partisanship. Now, the big orange fella, who, AKA our president, passed an issued an executive order. And it had some solid features to it, because among the features was that they had to provide a certain amount of scholarships for women's sports as well as men's sports. And so that was a plus. It banned collectives, which would be a major difference. Look, if we're in this game and I'm a fervent Cal alum, I want to see one Rose Bowl before I leave the planet. That's our greatest wish and aspiration. And so if we're competing to try to produce a competitive football team, we have to do the things that Kevin Kennedy said. We have to stay competitive, but there are consequences and costs to it. We live in a real world where basketball, we're about to have March Madness, is a major sport. We've got to be able to stay competitive. But frankly, and those of you who went to Cal may feel differently about this, I'm happy if we have a football team that goes 7-4 and goes to a bowl game every time and has quality to true student athletes with high character. And, we don't have to be a football factory. We can do it our own way. But just a bowl game, once in a while would be very, very nice. So these are some of the issues that I see in NIL. I've watched the negotiation process that goes on, and where a marketing agent pits one school against the other. And we talked about all sorts of sources of revenue and the rest of it. Basically, look, we're in an era of branding and marketing. If an athlete has enough interesting content and enough distinguishing features in terms of logo and trademark, they'll aggregate followers on every form of social media. That athlete has an advantage in this process. That's the rest. So just a little bit about that. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything.
You spoke a lot about just rabid alumni like yourself that want to support programs, and obviously those are the same people that are donating. And so if you're losing interest in teams, and because I guess leagues are changing, conferences are changing, and rivalries are going away, do you see a long-term detriment to willingness to donate to these funds from alumni, and how the NIL and conference could clash?
What we need to do at Cal is what they do at Stanford and SC, which is a student hits a campus and they inform them that they're part of a family, a long-term experience, and that the alums are part of that. And that if you come here, you'll basically have contacts in media and business and everywhere else. If we could create that culture, then we have more alums from this school than anybody. I mean, we keep cranking out 30,000 students every 4 years. And we eclipse the following of the number of alums that Stanford has, for example. So we need to cultivate that feeling that you're part of a lifetime compact, and therefore you have an obligation to continue to support the university and continue to contribute.
I had a question about sports unions and college athletes organizing. So you make the point that marketing directors are completely unregulated, yet agents are tightly regulated because the professional sports unions are not subject to the antitrust laws and therefore can impose those restrictions on agents. What do you think the future of college athletes being treated as employees and being able to organize will be?
The practical problem with players organizing is that they're only on campus for 3 or 4 years. And so and then they turn over, they're in the pros or finding other employment or doing something. You've got to have some organizing fulcrum around which there's continuity to push for unionization. You need it takes organization and structure to be able to mount that. It's the same problem every group of employees has ever had, and which is that you got this big institution, you've got, and you have the transient interests of athletes. So there have been that. Now, there are certain states in the country that don't allow collective bargaining for state employees. So you've got problems in the South with doing it. But I think it's inevitable that someone will make that argument. And so, look, when I started in agentry, players were completely unorganized. They had no pensions, no benefits, no protections, and teams didn't have to deal with agents. So in those first couple of years, I'd call up the Cincinnati Bengals and say I was representing a player, and they slammed the phone down and said, "We don't deal with agents." Great. So this is embryonic, and in the early stages, you have athletes who are scared to death because they think it will eliminate that the institution will retaliate and they'll lose their place in line. And the problem with athletic thinking is it's short term and thinks about what am I going to do this year and what's my situation next year in terms of long term. That's why I'm saying it's going to take an organizer, a new group to be able to fundamentally have the power and staying power to negotiate for their rights.
On the agent side, there's kind of a problem like you were talking about with almost too many cooks in the kitchen for these players and how they have marketing agents, they have other collegiate agents, then when they're going to go pro, they could even sign with a different agency or take a different agent within their own agency. Do you feel like there should be a more rigorous certification process for collegiate agents, or do you think there should just be less agents overall, or what do you see to fix that issue of having almost too much uneducated representation?
The question is who's got jurisdiction to organize and enforce this. The NCAA ostensibly is the representative of collegiate athletics, but it's not doing anything. Who would do it? But the need is really intense. I mean, you've got people dealing with hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, and some of the marketing agents don't even understand contracts. I mean, they understand money, but they don't understand contractual language, contractual protections, the way a contract is written, what it obligates a player to, and what he's responsible for or her. Tough. So yes, I think there should be rigorous certification. To represent NFL players, I have to register with the state of California, which has a labor regulatory act. Other states have those same labor laws, and agents have actually been sent to jail in Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, and Texas for violating the state regulatory bill. And then you have campus compliance, so that a number of campuses restrict the ability of agents to talk to their players unless it's under their umbrella for Agents Day back on campus. So the question is, who organizes this? You have two bills in Congress, you have an executive order, you have a Trump just had a big conference, right, with all the quote stakeholders back at the White House. Who's got jurisdiction? Who actually has the power here to reform the system? You can ask it.
What do you think about the increasing commercialization of youth sports and the role that that plays going into this next generation of athletics?
Well, one of my big issues has been concussion over the years and protecting players' brain integrity and health against traumatic brain injury. And one of our suggestions is that people don't play tackle football till high school. So it's inevitable that anything that can be commercialized will be commercialized if there's a market for it, if there's the rest of it. So again, who's got jurisdiction to protect young kids that are doing it? State superintendent of public instruction. You know, when they get older, you got CIF, but there really is no limit to where this goes. If you can aggregate on social media a significant following on TikTok or LinkedIn or Instagram or any of the multiple platforms of content supply, if you get eyeballs on that, whatever your background is, you can find commercial advertisers who want to benefit from that content stream.
Thank you. A round of applause again.